No one warns you that a quick Walmart run could land you in the middle of a screaming, charger-stomping showdown. I'm just your average 28-year-old guy, working a 9 to 5 office job that pays the bills but doesn't exactly spark joy. I'm not a thrill seeker, and I certainly don't go looking for drama. But life has a funny way of throwing you into situations you never saw coming. And this particular Tuesday evening was no exception. I was at Walmart because, well, adulthood. My fridge was empty, my laundry detergent was running low, and I needed a new phone charger because the old one had finally given up the ghost after one too many tangles with my cat. I was just trying to get in and out as quickly as possible, armed with a shopping list and a vague sense of purpose. Little did I know, I was about to witness a spectacle that would make me question humanity itself. The store was its usual chaotic self, bright fluorescent lights, the faint hum of pop music over the speakers, and the occasional wail of a toddler who didn't want to be there. I was in the electronics aisle, comparing phone chargers, when I first noticed her. She was a woman in her late 40s, with bleach blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail and a face that looked like it had seen one too many bad decisions. She was wearing a neon pink tracksuit that screamed, "I'm here to make a scene," and she was pacing back and forth in front of the TV section, muttering to herself. At first, I didn't think much of it. People mutter to themselves in Walmart all the time. But then she shifted her gaze to me. I was just standing there, minding my own business, debating between a $10 charger and a $20 one boasting fast-charging technology. Speaking of which, what's your go-to charger from Walmart? Drop your recommendations in the comments. I'd love to hear what works best for you. So when she suddenly appeared in front of me, blocking my view of the shelf, "You think you're better than me, don't you?" she spat, her eyes narrowing as she glared at me. I was so caught off guard that I didn't even know how to respond. I just stood there, holding chargers, like some kind of indecisive statue. She took my silence as an invitation to keep going. "I see you looking at me," she continued, her voice rising with every word. "You think you're so smart with your fancy chargers and your whatever it is you're buying. Well, guess what? I don't need your judgment." At this point, I was starting to get a little nervous. I'm not exactly a confrontational person, and I had no idea how to de-escalate this situation. I tried to smile politely and said, "Ma'am, I'm just here to buy a charger. I'm not judging anyone." But that only made things worse. Her face turned red, and she started waving her arms around like she was trying to swat away a swarm of invisible bees. "Don't you ma'am me," she shouted. "I know your type. You think you can just waltz in here and look down on people like me. Well, I've had enough." Before I could even process what was happening, she grabbed the $20 charger out of my hand and threw it on the ground. Then, to my absolute horror, she started stomping on it with her sneaker-clad feet, yelling, "How do you like that, huh? How do you like that?" I was frozen in place, unsure of what to do. I glanced around, hoping someone would come to my rescue, but the other shoppers seemed just as stunned as I was. That's when my friend Jake appeared out of nowhere. Jake is the kind of guy who thrives in chaotic situations. He's a bartender by trade, which means he's used to dealing with drunk, belligerent people on a nightly basis. He's also 6 feet 4 inches and built like a linebacker, so he's not exactly someone you want to mess with. "Hey, lady," Jake said, stepping between me and the woman. "Why don't you take a deep breath and calm down before you hurt yourself?" For a moment, it seemed like Jake's presence might actually diffuse the situation. But then the woman turned her rage on him, screaming, "Oh, so now you're sending your muscle after me? Is that how it is? Well, I'm not scared of you." She lunged at Jake, but he sidestepped her easily, catching her by the arm before she could do any real damage. "All right, that's enough," he said firmly. "You need to leave before this gets out of hand." The woman struggled against his grip, but Jake held her steady. "Let go of me," she shrieked. "You can't treat me like this. I'm a paying customer." By this point, a crowd had started to gather, and I could see a couple of Walmart employees making their way over. I knew things were about to get even messier, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I pulled out my phone and called the store's security, explaining the situation as quickly as I could. Then I grabbed my $10 charger and headed for the checkout, leaving Jake to deal with the fallout. As I walked away, I could still hear the woman screaming in the background, her voice echoing through the store. I didn't stick around to see how it ended, but I have a feeling it wasn't pretty. I just wanted to get out of there and put the whole ordeal behind me. Reflecting on the incident later, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven that woman to such a breaking point. Was she having a bad day? Was there something deeper going on in her life that made her lash out like that? Or was she just one of those people who thrive on chaos and confrontation? Whatever the reason, it was a stark reminder of how fragile human behavior can be, especially in a place as inherently stressful as Walmart. Let's take a moment to talk about the ethics of public meltdowns, because this incident really got me thinking. On one hand, it's easy to judge someone like the woman in the neon pink tracksuit. She was clearly out of line, and her behavior was unacceptable. But on the other hand, I can't help but feel a little sympathy for her. We've all had moments where we've felt overwhelmed, where the weight of our problems has pushed us to the brink. The difference is that most of us have the self-control to keep those feelings in check, at least in public. But what about the people who don't? What about the people who, for whatever reason, can't regulate their emotions in the same way? Should we be more understanding of their struggles, or is it our responsibility to hold them accountable for their actions? It's a tricky question, and one that doesn't have an easy answer. What I do know is that public spaces like Walmart are a microcosm of society, and they bring out the best and worst in people. For every person who loses their cool in the electronics aisle, there's someone like Jake who steps up to defuse the situation. And maybe that's the lesson here, that no matter how crazy things get, there's always a way to find a little bit of humanity in the chaos. If you've ever been in a similar situation, or if you just want to share your thoughts on public meltdowns, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you're interested in more stories like this, be sure to check out my other content. Trust me, there's plenty more where this came from. Let me start by saying I'm not someone who usually finds themselves in awkward situations. I'm a 26-year-old freelance writer, which means I spend most of my time hunched over my laptop, crafting articles about everything from sustainable living to the best dog parks in the city. I'm also a bit of an introvert, so dating doesn't come naturally to me. But after months of swiping on every dating app known to humanity, I finally matched with someone who seemed normal. Her name was Jamie. She was a 28-year-old environmental scientist, and she had a cat. A cat. That's basically a green flag in my book. So when she suggested we meet at a cozy little cafe downtown, I thought, why not? Little did I know, this date would turn into a nightmare I'd be replaying in my head for years to come. The cafe was one of those trendy spots with mismatched furniture, succulents on every table, and a menu full of overpriced avocado toast. I arrived early, partly because I'm chronically punctual and partly because I wanted to scope out the place and make sure I didn't accidentally sit at the wrong table. I ordered a latte and settled into a corner booth, nervously scrolling through my phone to avoid making eye contact with anyone. When Jamie walked in, I was relieved to see she looked exactly like her photos, tall, with curly blonde hair and a warm smile. She waved at me, and I waved back, trying to look casual and not like I'd been practicing my cool girl wave in the mirror earlier. Things started off well enough. We made small talk about our jobs, our hobbies, and, of course, her cat. She showed me a picture of a fluffy tabby named Luna, and I immediately melted. This woman has a cat, I thought. How bad could she be? But just as I was starting to relax, the universe decided to remind me that I'm not allowed to have nice things. The incident began innocently enough. Jamie had gone to the counter to order us another round of drinks, and I was sitting alone at the table, scrolling through my phone to avoid looking like a loser. That's when I noticed him, a man in his late 40s, dressed in what can only be described as tech bro casual. He was standing near our table, glaring at me like I'd just kicked his puppy. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then he marched over and said, "Excuse me, but do you realize you're sitting at my table?" I blinked at him, confused. I'm sorry. I didn't see a reserved sign or anything." He crossed his arms and huffed. "I always sit here. It's my spot. I come here every Saturday, and everyone knows this is where I sit. Now, let me be clear. This cafe doesn't take reservations. It's first come, first served, and I had been sitting at this table for a good 20 minutes before he even walked in. But before I could explain that, he leaned in closer and said, "I don't appreciate people like you taking what's mine." People like me? What was that supposed to mean? I was about to ask him to clarify when Jamie returned with our drinks. She looked from me to the man and back again, clearly sensing the tension. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The man turned to her and said, "Your friend here seems to think she can just take whatever she wants. I was just explaining to her that this is my table." Jamie, bless her heart, tried to defuse the situation. "Oh, I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding. We didn't realize this table was reserved." "It's not reserved," he snapped. "It's just common courtesy. But I guess some people don't have any manners. At this point, I was starting to get angry. Who did this guy think he was, waltzing in here and acting like he owned the place? But before I could say anything, he did something that made my blood boil. He picked up my latte and took a sip. My latte. The one I'd been drinking from. The one that had my lipstick on the rim. "Hey," I shouted, standing up so fast I almost knocked over the table. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He smirked at me, clearly enjoying the fact that he'd gotten under my skin. "If you're not going to respect my space, then I don't have to respect yours." That was the last straw. I grabbed my phone and stormed over to the counter, where the barista was watching the whole thing unfold with wide eyes. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a man over there who's harassing me and my date. He just took a sip of my drink without asking. Can you please do something about it?" The barista, a young woman with a nose ring and a look of mild panic on her face, nodded and went to talk to the man. Meanwhile, Jamie stayed by the table, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I couldn't blame her. This was supposed to be a first date, not an episode of Jerry Springer. The barista returned a few minutes later, looking apologetic. "I'm really sorry about that," she said. "He's a regular, and he can be difficult. I asked him to leave, but he refused. I can comp your drinks if you'd like to move to another table." I wanted to scream. Why should we have to move? We hadn't done anything wrong. But at this point, I just wanted to get out of there. I looked at Jamie, who gave me a weak smile and said, "Maybe we should just go somewhere else?" I nodded, too frustrated to argue. We grabbed our things and left the cafe, the man's smug grin burning into my memory. As we walked down the street, Jamie tried to lighten the mood by cracking a joke about how at least the date couldn't get any worse. I laughed, but inside, I was seething. Who did that guy think he was, ruining my date like that? In the end, Jamie and I ended up getting ice cream and talking for hours. The date wasn't a total disaster, but I couldn't shake the feeling of frustration. That man's entitlement was baffling. Who just walks up to a stranger and demands their table, and then has the audacity to drink their latte? It was like he thought the world revolved around him, and everyone else was just an extra in his movie. Looking back, I realized that people like him are everywhere. They're the ones who cut in line at the grocery store, who talk loudly on their phones in quiet spaces, who think the rules don't apply to them. And while I'd like to say I handled the situation with grace, the truth is, I didn't. I let him get to me, and that's what bothers me the most. But maybe next time, I'll be ready. Maybe next time, I'll stand my ground and refuse to let someone like him ruin my day. Or maybe I'll just stay home and order takeout. Either way, I've learned my lesson. Dating is hard enough without entitled strangers making it worse. Let's take a moment to talk about the ethics of this situation, because honestly, it's baffling. What gives someone the right to act like they own a public space? Cafes, parks, buses, these are shared spaces, and the whole point is that they're for everyone. But somehow, there are people out there who think they're the exception to the rule. They're the ones who spread their stuff out on the subway seats, who hog the treadmill at the gym, who think their regular status gives them dibs on a table at a cafe. And the worst part? They don't even see anything wrong with it. This kind of entitlement isn't just annoying, it's harmful. It creates a culture where the loudest, most aggressive person gets their way, while the rest of us are left feeling frustrated and powerless. And let's be real, most of us aren't confrontational by nature. We don't want to make a scene or start an argument. So we let it slide, and the cycle continues. But here's the thing, we don't have to. We can stand up to these people, not by stooping to their level, but by calmly asserting our rights. If someone tries to take your table, politely but firmly tell them no. If they drink your latte, report them to the staff. And if all else fails, walk away. You don't have to engage with their nonsense, but you also don't have to let them win. And to anyone out there who's ever acted like the man in this story, I have one question. Why? What do you gain from making someone else's day worse? Is it really worth it? Because let me tell you, the rest of us are getting pretty tired of your antics. So do us all a favor and check your entitlement at the door. The world doesn't revolve around you, and it's about time you realize that. I've always been someone who finds comfort in structure and predictability. At 32, I've carved out a life that works for me, one that accommodates my unique way of experiencing the world. I have synesthesia, a neurological condition where my senses intertwine in unexpected ways. For me, sounds have colors, words have textures, and numbers carry distinct personalities. It's a fascinating way to live, but it also means that chaotic environments can quickly overwhelm me. That's why I've built a career as a freelance illustrator, working from the quiet sanctuary of my home studio. My condition allows me to create art that resonates deeply with clients, but it also means I have to be selective about where and how I spend my time in public spaces. One afternoon, I found myself at a busy bookstore cafe in the heart of the city. I had a looming deadline for a children's book illustration project, and my home internet had gone down unexpectedly. The cafe was a familiar spot, known for its cozy atmosphere and reliable Wi-Fi. I settled into a corner table, my sketch pad and tablet neatly arranged in front of me. The hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of dishes faded into the background as I lost myself in my work. The project required a whimsical forest scene, and I was deep in the process of blending colors that felt like soft whispers and gentle breezes to my mind. Everything was going smoothly until I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder. I turned to see a man standing behind me, his expression a mix of anger and suspicion. He was in his late 50s, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed authority, with a briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. His eyes bore into me, and I could feel the weight of his judgment before he even spoke. He accused me of stealing his phone, claiming he had seen me near his table earlier. His tone was accusatory, his words laced with disdain. I was stunned. I had been at my table the entire time, completely absorbed in my work. The only time I had gotten up was to grab a refill of tea, and even then, I had been careful to avoid bumping into anyone. I tried to explain, but he cut me off, insisting that I empty my bag to prove my innocence. My heart raced as I opened my bag, revealing my sketch pad, tablet, a few pens, and my own phone. There was no sign of his device, but instead of backing down, he grew more aggressive. He demanded to check my pockets, his voice rising as he stepped closer. I felt a wave of panic as my synesthesia kicked into overdrive, the colors and sounds of the room blending into a chaotic swirl. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I didn't know how to make it stop. Just as I was about to lose my composure, a familiar face appeared. It was my colleague, Sam, who happened to be passing by the cafe. Sam is a calm and level-headed person, someone who always knows how to defuse tense situations. They stepped in, asking what was going on. The man repeated his accusation, his tone still sharp but now tinged with uncertainty under Sam's steady gaze. Sam listened patiently, then suggested the man double-check his belongings before making any further accusations. Reluctantly, the man opened his briefcase and, after a moment of rummaging, pulled out his phone. He stared at it for a moment, his face flushing with embarrassment. Without a word of apology, he snapped his briefcase shut and walked away, his earlier bravado replaced by a stiff, hurried exit. I sat there, my hands trembling, as Sam placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. The man's accusation had been baseless, his actions invasive and disrespectful. He had assumed the worst of me without a shred of evidence, and his refusal to apologize only added insult to injury. The incident left me feeling shaken and frustrated, but it also reinforced my determination to stand up for myself and others who face similar injustices. As I packed up my things and left the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It wasn't just the accusation that bothered me. It was the way he had treated me, as if I were somehow less deserving of respect because I didn't fit his idea of what a respectable person should look like. His behavior was a stark reminder that, despite progress, prejudice and entitlement still exist in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. But I had proof. Not just the contents of my bag, but the knowledge that I had done nothing wrong. His assumptions said more about him than they did about me. While the incident left a bitter taste in my mouth, it also strengthened my resolve to advocate for a world where people are judged by their actions, not their appearances or circumstances. In the end, I chose not to confront him further or report the incident. Instead, I walked away, focusing on the things I could control rather than dwelling on his ignorance. But I won't forget what happened, and I won't let it silence me. If anything, it's made me more determined to speak out against prejudice and to stand up for fairness and respect in all situations. What happened that day was more than just an uncomfortable encounter. It was a reflection of a broader societal issue. The man's behavior exemplified how entitlement and prejudice can lead to harmful assumptions and actions. He felt justified in accusing me because he believed his status and appearance gave him the right to do so. But the truth is, no one has the right to treat another person with such disrespect, regardless of their background or circumstances. This incident also underscores the importance of evidence and due process. In a world where accusations can spread rapidly and have lasting consequences, it's crucial to have proof before making claims. The man's lack of evidence didn't stop him from publicly shaming me, and that's a problem. It's a reminder that we need to be more mindful of how we treat others and more willing to admit when we're wrong. If you've ever been in a similar situation, know that you're not alone. And if you're interested in learning more about how to handle confrontations and stand up for yourself, I encourage you to explore resources on conflict resolution and self-advocacy. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. I've always seen myself as an unremarkable guy. At 35, my life is simple, no hidden talents, no wild past, just a regular person muddling through like most. I work as an office administrator for a small logistics company. It's not a flashy gig, think endless spreadsheets and lukewarm coffee, but it keeps the rent paid and gives me a predictable rhythm I've grown to lean on. I don't chase drama or crave the spotlight. I dodge them both, preferring quiet nights with a paperback, a jog under the streetlights, or a laid-back pint with buddies. Nothing about me pings as odd or shady, which made that Saturday feel like a punch from nowhere. It was a crisp afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs low, and the air smells faintly of exhaust and pretzels from the street vendors. I'd carved out some time to run errands downtown, nails and a hammer from the hardware store, then a detour to the mall for new running shoes. The mall was a zoo, as it always is on weekends, a swirl of chatter and shuffling bags. I didn't mind. With my earbuds nestled in, I let a history podcast about Roman aqueducts wash over me, cocooning myself in facts while I wove through the crowd. After snagging a pair of gray Nikes from the sale rack, I figured I'd earned a breather. The food court beckoned, greasy with fry oil and buzzing with overlapping voices, so I grabbed a black coffee from a kiosk and staked out a corner table near a fake fern, settling in to watch the parade of strangers. The coffee was bitter, steaming in its flimsy cup, and I cradled it between my palms, letting the warmth seep in. I was halfway through, lost in the drone of my podcast and the idle swirl of mall life, teenagers giggling over fries, a toddler smearing ketchup on his stroller, when I felt it. Eyes on me. Not a casual glance, but a steady, deliberate wait. I looked up, scanning the tables, and there she was, 3 rows over. Early 40s, sharp suit, dark hair pulled tight in a bun. She sat ramrod straight, a queen on a folding chair, staring right through me. I shifted in my seat, tugging an earbud loose. Maybe she was zoned out, and I just happened to be the backdrop. I brushed it off and took another sip, but the prickling didn't fade. Then she moved. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the tile, and strode toward me with purpose. Her heels snapped against the floor, click, 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 like a metronome counting down to something bad. My stomach tightened as she closed the distance, stopping inches from my table. She crossed her arms, her blazer creasing sharply, and fixed me with a look that wasn't just suspicious, it was a gavel coming down. I just realized my wallet's gone, she said, voice low and edged with steel. And I saw you near my table earlier. I blinked, coffee halfway to my mouth, words jamming in my throat. What was all I managed, barely audible over the food court's hum. She didn't flinch. My wallet, she repeated, slower, like I was dense. I saw you hovering around where I was sitting. Where is it? Her tone wasn't a question, it was an indictment, and it hit me like a slap. I set the cup down, hands unsteady, trying to piece together what she meant. I haven't been near your table, I said, voice cracking slightly. I've been right here since I got my coffee. She smirked, a thin, cutting thing, and tilted her head. That's convenient. I don't buy it. Before I could respond, she leaned forward, resting a manicured hand on the table's edge. Empty your pockets. Let me see your bag. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the confidence of someone who's never been told no. My pulse kicked up, a frantic thud against my ribs. I'm not built for this. I don't argue. I don't snap back. I'm the guy who holds the door and mumbles apologies even when it's not my fault. But this was insane. I didn't take your wallet, I said, louder now, though my mouth felt dry. I'm not emptying anything. I've been sitting here the whole time. Her eyes narrowed, and she straightened, arm snapping back to her chest. If you've got nothing to hide, why won't you cooperate? Her voice rose, slicing through the chatter around us, and heads started to turn. A guy in a polo shirt paused mid-bite of his burger, craning his neck. 2 women with shopping bags whispered behind their hands. The air thickened with attention, and I felt it pressing in, hot and suffocating. I don't have to prove anything to you, I shot back, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. I didn't do it. But she wasn't listening. She stepped closer, her shadow falling over me, and jabbed a finger toward my backpack on the chair. Open it. Now, or I'll get security and let them sort you out. My face burned, anger, embarrassment, a cocktail of both. The crowd was growing, a loose ring of strangers sizing me up like I was some petty crook caught red-handed. I could feel their eyes, their silent bets on how this would play out. I wanted to shrink, to vanish, but I was pinned. "Look," I started, gripping the table's edge, "I don't know you. I didn't go near your table. Check your stuff before you—" She cut me off, voice booming now. "You're stalling. That's what guilty people do." The word guilty landed like a brick, and the murmurs around us swelled. A kid pointed, his mom shushing him half-heartedly. My hands shook. I could see them trembling on the tabletop, and I hated it. I hated her certainty, her entitlement, the way she'd turned my quiet break into a public trial. I was about to shove my bag at her, just to shut her up, when a shadow loomed larger than hers. "Everything okay here?" A security guard, broad-shouldered and bored-looking, materialized beside us. His radio crackled faintly, and I latched onto his presence like a lifeline. She spun toward him, launching into her story without missing a beat, how her wallet vanished, how she'd clocked me lurking, how I was dodging her demands. She painted me as a cartoon villain, all sneaky fingers and shifty eyes. The guard listened, chewing gum slowly, then swung his gaze to me. "Your turn," he said, neutral but firm. I swallowed, throat tight. "I've been at this table the whole time. I got coffee, sat down, that's it. I didn't go near her. I don't know what she's talking about." My voice wavered, but I forced it steady, meeting his eyes. He nodded, glancing between us, then tilted his head at her. "Ma'am, why don't you check your bag again? Just to be sure." She huffed, lips pursing, but flipped open her purse with a dramatic flourish. Her fingers rifled through, keys jangled, a lipstick rolled out, and then she froze. Slowly, she pulled out a slim black wallet, her face collapsing from righteous fury to a tight, embarrassed grimace. "Must have been in the side pocket," she muttered, barely audible. No apology, no glance my way, just a quick snap of her purse and a pivot on her heel. She clicked off, disappearing into the crowd like she hadn't just torched my afternoon. The guard gave me a half-shrug, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes, and ambled away. The onlookers melted back to their fries and phones, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and a heartbeat that wouldn't settle. I sat there, hands still jittery, replaying it all. Relief trickled and she was gone. I was clear, but frustration surged harder. It wasn't just the accusation, it was her disdain, the way she treated me like dirt under her shoe. As I grabbed my bag and left, the incident clung to me like damp clothes, a reminder that some people wield their assumptions like they're owed the world. But I had proof, her wallet, my innocence. She misjudged me, and that said more about her than it ever could about me. I wouldn't forget it, but I wouldn't let it define me either. That afternoon was a stark lesson in how fast assumptions can spiral into unfairness. Her entitlement wasn't subtle, she wielded it like a right, propped up by her suit and swagger. But no one gets a free pass to steamroll others, no matter who they are. It also underscored something bigger: accusations need substance. In a world where a pointed finger can ruin someone, proof isn't optional. She had none, yet she humiliated me without hesitation. That's not just careless, it's reckless. We owe each other better than that, and we owe ourselves the guts to own up when we're wrong. If you've been there, you're not alone. And if you want to navigate moments like these with more confidence, look into conflict resolution or self-advocacy tools. Small steps can shift the balance toward a world where respect isn't negotiable. I never thought my mundane life would take such a bizarre turn, but here I am, sitting in the back seat of an Uber, my mind racing as I try to process what just happened. Let me back up a bit. My name is Clara Bennett, and I'm a 28-year-old wildlife biologist. I specialize in urban ecosystems, which means I spend my days studying how animals adapt to city life, everything from raccoons rummaging through trash cans to peregrine falcons nesting on skyscrapers. It's not the most glamorous job, but it's fulfilling in its own way. Today, however, was not a day for fulfillment. It was a day for survival. I had just wrapped up a long day of field work in Central Park, tracking the movements of a particularly elusive red-tailed hawk. The data collection had been grueling, and I was covered in dirt, sweat, and the faint smell of bird droppings. All I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and collapse onto my couch. The subway was out of the question. I needed to get home as quickly as possible. So, I opened the Uber app, requested a ride, and within minutes, a silver sedan pulled up. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes, greeted me with a nod. His name on the app was Greg. I slid into the back seat, grateful for the air conditioning and the chance to zone out for a bit. As we pulled away from the curb, I noticed something off about Greg. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes darting back and forth like he was trying to figure something out. I brushed it off, assuming he was just one of those overly curious types. But then he started talking, and that's when things took a turn for the weird. He began by asking me the usual small talk questions, how my day was, what I did for a living, but his tone was off, almost too eager. I answered politely, hoping he'd get the hint that I wasn't in the mood for conversation. But he didn't. Instead, he started rambling about his life, how he used to be a successful real estate agent, but lost everything in the 2008 housing crash. I nodded along, half listening, until he dropped the bomb. He confessed to being involved in some shady business, the kind of stuff that would make most people run screaming. My mind raced. Was he threatening me? Was this some kind of sick joke? I tried to keep my composure, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I glanced at the door, calculating how quickly I could get out if things went south. The car slowed to a stop at a red light, and I considered bolting. But before I could make a move, he turned around to look at me directly, his eyes intense. He told me he needed to get it off his chest, that he'd been carrying this around for too long and couldn't keep it in anymore. I stared at him, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do with this information? Call the police? Report him to Uber? And what if he was just messing with me? I didn't know what to believe. The light turned green, and he turned back to the road, his grip tightening on the wheel. He said he knew this was a lot to take in, but he just needed to tell someone. He thought I seemed like a good person to tell. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand he let me out of the car immediately. But another part of me was curious, morbidly so. What had he done? Who were these people he knew? And why was he telling me all this? The rest of the ride passed in a blur. He didn't say much else, and I was too stunned to ask any more questions. When we finally pulled up to my apartment, I practically leaped out of the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my phone to end the ride. I stood on the sidewalk, watching as the car drove away, my mind still reeling. What had just happened? Had I just been in the presence of a criminal? Or was he just some lonely guy with a twisted sense of humor? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to report him to Uber, but what would I say? That my driver confessed to being involved in shady business? It sounded ridiculous, even to me. And what if he was telling the truth? What if reporting him put me in danger? In the end, I decided to let it go. I didn't have any proof, and for all I knew, he was just trying to scare me. But the encounter left me shaken, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just brushed up against something dark and dangerous. As I walked up to my apartment, I couldn't help but think about Greg's behavior. Why had he chosen to confess to me, a complete stranger? Was it some kind of cry for help? Or was he just trying to unload his guilt onto someone else? Whatever the reason, it was a stark reminder that you never really know who you're sharing a ride with. And while most Uber drivers are just regular people trying to make a living, there are always a few who are carrying around secrets that could change your life in an instant. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking more and more about the ethics of the situation. Should I have done more? Should I have reported him, even if it meant risking my own safety? It's a tough call, and one that I'm still grappling with. But one thing's for sure, I'll never look at an Uber ride the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, I'll think twice before getting into a car with a stranger, no matter how convenient it might seem. If you've ever had a strange or unsettling experience with a rideshare driver, I'd love to hear about it. Share your stories in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about the ethics and safety of ride-sharing. And if you found this story relatable or thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.